Hi everyone, my name is Brittany J. Jones. Due to Mimi G's schedule, she has asked me to step in to record the sew-alongs for her new Simplicity patterns, Simplicity 8994, as well as Simplicity 8985. In this video, we will be sewing along with View B on Simplicity 8994. Let's go ahead and review the pattern pieces that we need to cut out, and then we can start sewing. For the pattern pieces that we need to cut out for View B, we need to cut out pattern piece 6. This is the front, and we need to cut 2. Pattern piece number 7. This is the pocket, and we need to cut 2. Pattern piece number 8. This is the flap. We need to cut 4 of fabric and 2 of interfacing. Pattern piece number 9. This is the fly. We need to cut 1 of fabric and 1 of interfacing. Pattern piece 10. This is the underlap, and we need to cut 1. Pattern piece 11, this is the back, and we need to cut 2. Pattern piece 12, this is the carrier, and we need to cut 1. And pattern piece 13, this is the waistband. We need to cut 1 of fabric and 1 of interfacing. If you need any suggestions for fabric, on the back of the pattern envelope, they have a list of fabrics right here that would be great for all the views on this pattern. Once you have all your pattern pieces cut out as well as your fabric and you have transferred all of your markings, let's start sewing. To begin sewing our skirt, we're going to start on the front piece, and we're going to do stay stitching along the upper edge of both fronts at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I've already done mine, so you can go ahead and do yours. And then once you have your stay stitching done, you want to go ahead and trace out your marking right here for your stitching line. I have mine in red, so you probably can't see it. So go ahead and trace out your line. You can do it with your marking pen, or you can even hand baste it. The choice is yours. Once you have that done on the left side only, we also want to go ahead and at this large circle right here, we want to reinforce it. So we're going to stitch through this circle about 1 inch above it and 1 inch below it. So let's go ahead and reinforce this large circle right here. Once you have reinforced through your large circle on the left side, now we can go ahead and pin out our darts. So you should have transferred your dart legs. Let's go ahead and pin them out. All right, I have this dart pinned. I'm going to pin the other the same way, and I'm going to take it to the machine. I'm going to begin stitching here at the top. I'm going to back stitch, and I'm going to stitch all the way down to the point. And once I get down here, I'm going to leave some thread tails, and I'm going to tie a knot to secure it. So let's go ahead and stitch our darts in place now. All right, I'm going to tie a knot with these threads, then I'm going to stitch my other dart the same way. All right, now that I have my darts sewn onto my front, I've pressed them toward the center, and now we're going to put our front pieces right sides together, and we're going to stitch from the bottom up to this large circle. So let's go ahead and pin. All right, so we can go to the machine and we can start here at the hem. Make sure that you back stitch, stitch all the way up to this large circle and back stitch here. Let's go ahead and do that stitch now. Now that we have this center of our skirt stitched, we're going to clip right to this large circle, being sure not to clip through the stitching, only on the left front. So go ahead and grab your scissors and just clip right up to that circle. Now I'm going to go to my ironing board. I'm going to press this seam open, and then I'm going to go back to my serger, and I'm going to finish off these edges. And I'm also going to finish off the edge up here. I'm not going to finish off this edge because this is going to be trimmed down in a later step, but I'm going to go ahead and finish off these edges here with my serger. All right, so I've gone ahead and finished off my seam and I've pressed it open. So let's move on to working with our fly. To begin working on our fly piece, you want to go ahead and fuse interfacing to it. So this right here was a sample that I did, and I just wanted to show you how I fused the interfacing to it. I took my interfacing and I put it right sides facing. So this is the glue side of the interfacing facing up. So I have it right sides facing. And along this curved edge here, I stitched at 1/4 inch seam allowance. So then once it was stitched, I flipped it like so, and I was able to fuse the interfacing to it, giving me a nice clean edge right here on my fly. So again, I'm gonna put right sides facing with the interfacing. The glue side right here is sticking up. I'm gonna grab a couple pins. I'm gonna stitch along the unnotched edge of it at 1/4 inch seam allowance. So let's go ahead and do that now. Or if you don't want to do this method, you can just fuse your interfacing to your fly piece and you can just serge this edge, or you can turn in 1/4 inch and stitch it down. The choice is yours. But I'm gonna go ahead and stitch this down now. All right, now that I have it sewn on, I'm going to just trim it down just a little. Now I'm going to turn this so that it's right side out. I'm going to grab my iron. And now I can fuse the interfacing to the wrong side of the fly. Alright, so here's my fly. It's all fused together and I have a nice clean edge. So now let's move on to the next step. The next step is to go ahead and grab our front. And we're going to be working on the left front here, so I'm going to move the right out of the way. We're going to put the fly right sides facing, matching up our notches and the large circle. And we're going to pin in place. All right, now that you have it pinned, you want to take it to the machine and we're going to stitch it from down here at the large circle all the way up to the top at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So let's go ahead and do that stitching now. Now that we have it stitched on, we're going to trim above the large circle, trim this down to 1/4 inch. All right, now that we have it trimmed, let's go ahead and grab our zipper. All right, so here's my 7-inch zipper and I have opened out my fly. So now we're going to take our zipper and we have it face down. I'm going to put the zipper stock, the top of it, 1 inch from the upper edge. So I have my ruler here. I'm just going to measure out 1 inch. All right, so this is 1 inch. And you want this zipper tape to just be 1/4 inch past the seam. I'm going to put a pin here just to hold that in place for me. All right, so now that we have the zipper face down, the zipper stop here is 1 inch from the upper edge, and this zipper tape is only 1/4 inch past this seam. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch close to the zipper here on the left side only, not over here on the skirt, but just right here. We're going to stitch close to the zipper, and then we're going to stitch again 1/4 inch from that. So let's go ahead and do the stitching now. All right, now we can move on to the next step. All right, now that we have our zipper stitched down to the fly, we're going to turn it to the inside here. You want to pin it in place. And on the right side, I'm going to press under 3/8 inch. So let's go to our ironing boards now and go ahead and press under 3/8 of an inch on the right side of our skirt. So I just pressed under 3/8 of an inch right here on the right side. So now we are going to unzip our zipper. And I'm going to pin this folded edge close to the zipper teeth. You want to put that fold right next to the zipper teeth. Now that I have it pinned, I'm going to go to the machine and I'm just going to baste this down. You want to baste and make sure that you have this folded edge close to the zipper teeth, but you don't want to stitch on the zipper teeth. So let's go ahead and baste this down now. All right, so I have the right side basted on. Now we can start working on our underlap. So for the underlap, we want to fold it wrong sides together. And we are going to baste it along the seam line at a 5/8 of an inch stitch. And then you want to finish off the raw edges. This is mine right here that I've already done. I basted it along the stitching line at 5/8 of an inch. And then I also finished off the edges with my serger. So you want to go ahead and do your underlap the same way. All right, so let's go ahead and attach our underlap onto our skirt. And the underlap is going to go along the right side. And we are going to line it up at the top. We want our coils to go right past the seam line. So that line where you baste it on your underlap, you want the coils to go just past that. Make sure it's even at the top. Then we can pin in place. Now we're going to go to the machine and we're going to baste through all thicknesses, and I'm just going to follow along with the basting stitch that I previously did. So let's go ahead and baste the underlap to the front now. So I have my underlap basted on. So now we want to zip up the zipper, and you want to lightly press it and make sure that everything is laying smoothly. So I'm going to grab my pressing cloth and just lightly press over this. So I just pressed this lightly. We can go ahead and unzip the zipper, and now we can do a regular machine stitch right along our basting. All right, now that we have it stitched, let's move on to the next step. All right, now that we have it stitched, we can go ahead and clip any loose threads that you have. You can also remove your basting stitches. And now we're going to zip the zipper up. We're going to turn it to the inside. And we're going to move the underlap out of the way. And I'm going to put a pin here. Next, we're going to turn to the right side and we're going to follow along with our fly stitching that we transferred. So let's go ahead and do that now. If your stitching line right here has disappeared since you've been constructing, you want to go ahead and transfer your stitching line again. And we're going to go to the machine and we're going to stitch right along this stitching line all the way down here to the large circle. So let's go ahead and start at the top and stitch along our stitching line now. All right, now that we have the stitching line for our fly done, I'm going to go ahead and remove my pins and turn it to the inside. And now we're going to tack together our underlap and our fly. Right down here at the bottom, you just want to hand tack that together. So let's go ahead and do that now. Once you have your underlap and your fly tacked together, you can go ahead and trim off the excess of your zipper if you had a long zipper. And then on the right side, you want to do a bar tack right down here at the end of your fly stitching through all thicknesses. So let's go ahead and do a bar tack now. All right, once you have your bar tack done, we are all done with our zipper, and now we can move on to the next step. Next, we're going to begin working on our pockets, and the first thing to do is to fold in 1/4 of an inch on the upper edge of the pocket. So I'm going to fold it to the inside. Once you have it pressed, now you want to fold it along the right side, along the fold line. I put some clips into where my fold line is, so I'm just going to fold it right where my snips are. And now we can go to the machine and we can stitch this down as well as all the way along the pocket along the seam line. So we're going to stitch at a 5/8 of an inch all the way around our pocket. So let's go ahead and press the other pocket the same way and go to the machine and stitch it. Now that we have both of the pockets stitched around along the seam line, now we can go ahead and trim this seam up here along the fold line to 1/4 of an inch. Next, we're going to stitch the darts down here at the bottom of our pocket. So we're going to put it together right sides facing and match up our broken lines here. I put snips into where my lines were, and you want to match up those lines. I'm going to pin through them just as we would if we was pinning a dart. All right, once you have them both pinned, we're going to go to the machine. We're going to begin stitching up here. Make sure that you back stitch, and we're going to stitch all the way down to the point. And we're not going to back stitch here. We're just going to leave long tails and tie knots the same way we do darts. So again, start up here at the top, back stitch, stitch all the way to the point, and then tie a knot and do not back stitch here. So let's go ahead and stitch the corners of our pockets now. Go ahead and tie a knot with these threads and stitch your other 3 pleats in your pocket the same way. All right, now that we have the darts in our pocket sewn, now we want to press the seam flat. So I'm gonna open out the dart and press it flat. Depending on the type of fabric that you are using, if it's a heavyweight fabric, then you could just leave it open and flattened. If you have a lightweight fabric, then you can press your dart toward the center of the pocket. So now let's go ahead and press the other darts in the pocket the same way. All right, now that both of the darts in the pockets are pressed, now we can go ahead and flip it right side out. So you want to flip this facing here to the right side. Now we're going to press this down up here. We also want to press along the stitching line. So now that we have this all pressed, we can go to the machine and we need to stitch our facing closed. So we're going to stitch close to this pressed edge. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm gonna go ahead and clip off the loose threads and stitch the other pocket the same way. All right, now that we have stitched down the facing here on our pocket, we can put the pockets to the side and we can start working on the flaps. For our flaps, you should have cut 4 of fabric and 2 of interfacing. So we're gonna put right sides facing. I'm gonna grab my pins and I'm going to pin it all the way around. All right, once you have it pinned, we can go to the machine and we can stitch along the side edges and the lower edge in a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and be sure to leave the top open. So let's go ahead and pin the other the same way and go ahead and stitch it now. Go ahead and stitch your other flap the same way. Now that we have our flaps sewn, we can go ahead and clip into these curves. All right, now that we have this one trimmed, I'm going to flip it right side out. I'm going to use the curved edge of my point turner here. Now we can go ahead and give this a good press. All right, once you have your flaps turned right side out and pressed, you want to go to the machine and do a basting stitch along the opening edge at a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you do that, we can go ahead and pin our flap and pocket onto our skirt. So here's my front skirt piece, and you can see I've transferred the markings and lines for my pocket and for the flap. So now I'm going to go ahead and start with the pockets first, and I'm going to put it right up here at the marking and pin in place. And then I'm going to follow along with the lines that I transferred to make sure I put the pressed edge right on that line and pin in place. All right, now that we have the pockets pinned on, we're going to go ahead and stitch close to the pressed edge of the pocket along the side, this lower edge, and this side as well. Make sure that you back stitch at the beginning and end of your pockets. So let's go ahead and stitch our pockets now, and make sure that you follow along with your placement line. I'm going to put my needle down as I go around this curve. All right, now that we have our pockets sewn on, now we can go ahead and grab our flaps. And we want to line up this basting stitch that we did at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance right here with this placement line that we transferred, and pin it in place. All right, now we're going to go to the machine and we're going to stitch right along our basting stitch. So let's go ahead and do that now. Now that we have our flaps sewn on, we're going to trim close to this stitching. All right, now that we have that trimmed, now we can go ahead and fold our flap over, and we're going to top stitch at a 1/4 of an inch, making sure that we catch the raw edge inside of the stitch. So let's go to the machine and top stitch at a 1/4 of an inch right here along our flap. All right, once you have your pockets and flaps sewn on, we can put the front to the side and start to work on the back. To begin working on our back, you want to go ahead and do stay stitching along the upper edge of your back at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, the same way that we did for the front. And then you also want to go ahead and stitch your darts and press them toward the center. After you have the darts sewn and pressed, you can go ahead and stitch your center seam together, making sure that you match up your notches. Stitch at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have that done, we can move on to the next step. Next, we're going to go ahead and put our front and back right sides together and pin at our side seams. You want to match up your notches and pin in place. After you have the side seams pinned, we can go to the machine and stitch it at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and stitch your other side seam the same way, and then press your seams open. Alright, so I just stitched my side seams and I pressed my seams open. While I was pressing along this curve area, I made sure to use my pressing ham. That way I could keep this curve intact and not flatten it. So now that we have the side seams sewn and pressed, we can move on to start working on our carrier. To begin working on our carrier, the first thing that we're going to do is fold it in half, wrong sides facing lengthwise, and press. Now that we have this crease, we're going to open it out and we're going to bring the raw edges to the crease and press. Now we're going to fold it in half again and press. Alright, now we can go to the machine and we can stitch close on both of the long edges. So we're going to stitch on this side as well as on this side. So let's go ahead and stitch the carrier now. Once you have your carrier sewn, you want to go ahead and cut it into 5 equal parts that measure out to be 3 1/4. So 3 1/4 of an inch. Alright, now that you have your carrier pieces cut, we can go ahead and pin them onto our skirt. To pin the carriers onto our skirt, you should have transferred small circles. So now we're going to align the carrier up with the small circle. Make sure that you have raw edges even and pin in place. Now that you have the carriers pinned on, you want to go to the machine and baste them in place. Go ahead and baste all your other carriers on the same way. Now that we have the carriers basted on, we can go ahead and put our skirt to the side for just a moment to start working on the waistband. For our waistband, this is pattern piece 13. You want to go ahead and fuse interface into the wrong side of your waistband following the manufacturer's instructions. And then on the long edge that is unnotched, you want to press up 5/8 of an inch. I've already pressed up my 5/8 of an inch. Once you have it pressed, you want to trim it to 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and trim it down now. Now that I have it trimmed down, I'm going to go ahead and pin it right sides facing to the skirt. You should have transferred small dots onto your waistband. Those match up with your side seams. So right sides facing, let's go ahead and pin in place. Alright, now that you have your waistband pinned on, we can go to the machine and we can stitch it in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So let's go ahead and stitch our waistband now. Now that we have the waistband sewn on, you want to go ahead and trim your seam. Once you have it trimmed, you can go ahead and press your seam up to the waistband. Now that we have pressed up our seam toward the waistband, now we can go ahead and fold the front edge of the waistband onto itself like so. And we want to pin, making sure that you keep this 3/8 of an inch pressed up. Same thing on this side. Once you have them pinned, we can go ahead and stitch right along this front opening of the waistband. Now that we have the ends of the waistband sewn, we can go ahead and trim. And turn it right side out. And use your point turner if you need to. All right, now that we have it trimmed, we can go ahead and give it a press. And you want to go ahead and bring this folded edge of the band right here over the seam, just a little past the seam, and press that as well. Once you have it pressed, on the outside we're going to place pins right into the seam, and you want to make sure that you catch this pressed edge of the waistband on the inside. All right, now that we have the waistband pinned down, we have our pins on the outside. Now we can go ahead and stitch close to the seam, making sure that you catch in the folded edge of the waistband on the inside. So let's go ahead and stitch it in place now. All right, now that we have our waistband sewn on, the next step is to go ahead and fold up about 3/8 of an inch on the raw edge of our carriers, and you want to pin it to the top of your waistband and go ahead and stitch across to secure it, and you want to do that for all carriers. Fold in 3/8 of an inch on the raw edge, pin it to the top of the waistband, and stitch it across. So let's go ahead and sew our carriers on now. All right, now that I have the carriers sewn on, I'm going to start working on our hem. The hem allowance for this skirt is 1.25 inches, so I'm going to press up 1.25 inches, and then I'm going to press in 1/4 inch on the raw edge. So let's go ahead and press our hem up now. All right, once you have your hem pressed up, I pressed up the 1.25 inches, and then I pressed under the 1/4 inch for the raw edge. So I'm going to go to the machine now and go ahead and stitch the hem. All right, now that you have your hem sewn in place, I'm going to go ahead and clean it up a little bit. The last thing for us to do is to go ahead and sew on our buttonhole and our button, and we are all done with our skirt.